Assalamu alaikum. If your training is competing with your worship in Ramadan and you're trying to stuff as much protein and calories during iftar and suhoor, you're trying to train after Isha and you're basically sleeping from Fajr to Dhuhr, then I hate to break it to you, but you're compromising, you're ruining your Ramadan at the expense of your training, subhanAllah. And if you're fine, by the way, with, compromising your Ramadan at the expense of your training, then this video will probably not be for you. You might want to watch some other video. But in this video, inshallah, I'm going to be going over, first of all, should you even be training in Ramadan? And if so, how do you train properly? That way, Ramadan comes first and you're not compromising your religion, but rather your training is feeding into Ramadan instead of being compromised. So firstly, should we even be training in Ramadan? Like if Ramadan is like the best month of the year and we can get completely forgiven in Ramadan, Laylatul Qadr is in this month, then why don't we just focus on Ramadan completely and then, maybe put a pause on our training and then just come back to it afterwards? And to answer this, let's think about this question firstly. Would you quit your job or, pause your job for a whole month during Ramadan to focus on worship, right? If Ramadan is, obviously Ramadan is, more important than your job, right? So would you completely pause your job during Ramadan to focus on worship? Probably not, and you shouldn't, because, your job is also, for your deen. Your job is, to gain a living. That's, fuddled on you, right? To, make a living and to, survive, subhanAllah, right? So you wouldn't completely quit and pause your job during Ramadan, just to focus on worship. So then what about training, right? Because if training, a lot of us, we say that, we're training for deen, we're training for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want it to be written down as, good deeds for us, right? Because of the intention, right? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? But if that's the case, if we're training for a deen, then should we just completely quit or completely pause our, training during Ramadan? No, right? Rather, we just want to make sure that our job, like the same way that our job, we shouldn't let it get in the way of Ramadan, right? We should still be able to fast and do acts of worship in Ramadan, during, while we are working. The same way is with our training, right? We want our training to be not getting in the way of Ramadan, but rather it's feeding Ramadan. It's giving us good deeds in Ramadan that we are still training for the sake of Allah, and we're still, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we also have to ask ourselves the question, right? Are we really training for deen? Right? Are we just going to the gym and just doing normal bodybuilder splits and just kind of slapping the deen logo on there and saying, okay, we're training for deen? Right? Because training for deen is training, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, training to be like the role model. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet as the role model, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, then we should be training to be like him, sallallahu. And he had the dream physique, sallallahu. He had, we see his broad shoulders, right? He had a broad chest, he had, strong arms, right, sallallahu. He even, beat the strongest wrestler in Mecca. He was of the bravest on the battlefield, subhanAllah, right? All of these feats of strength of the Prophet sallallahu, we should be trying to train to be like him, sallallahu, not like the XYZ, fitness influencer online. And if you want to know more about, the Prophet sallallahu strength and his physique, then I made this video here, you can watch it, about the forgotten strength of the Prophet sallallahu, how he wasn't soft, he wasn't just some push off, and he wasn't just weak, but rather he was, gentle at times, obviously, rahmatul alameen, but, he was also firm when it needed to be, and he was strong. So if you want to watch that video, you can watch it here. So how exactly should we train during Ramadan then? If we should be training during Ramadan, how exactly do we train so that it's not getting in the way of Ramadan? You basically want to do the minimum amount that you need to do to maintain / even progress. Actually, a lot of people think you can't progress in Ramadan. You actually can, especially in for example, strength. You can progress in Ramadan, but you just want to make sure that's not getting in the way of Ramadan. So how do you actually do that? You want to focus on 3 main things, inshallah. So the first thing, you want to focus on intensity over volume. Intensity is basically how hard the set is, kind of the quality, if you want to say. And volume is more quantity, how many sets, how many reps, etc. You're doing. And so you want to focus on intensity over volume. Not obviously trying to max out and PR every single workout, but you want to focus more, 80%, I guess, on intensity and 20% on the volume, right? Why? For many, many reasons. Number one, in Ramadan, obviously we're fasting, right? We don't have, unlimited energy. We can't drink water or anything like that. Or eat. We have limited energy, right? And we don't want the workout to completely drain us through the rest of the day. We want to obviously, pray to Allah, we're with energy, right? We don't want to just die. So you want to focus on intensity because focusing on intensity during your workouts over volume makes you fatigue a lot less, right? When you do higher volume, you fatigue a lot more. And let me just give you an example so you can understand. If you take someone who can do a lot of push-ups, you say, okay, go max out on your push-ups right now. and they do, like, let's say 50 push-ups, right? They do 50 push-ups in a row. Right after the 50th push-up, right? They finish a set and they are laying on the ground. They're sore, right? They're fatigued. Like, they can't do another push. Like, they're completely, like, drained and dead. Like, their central nervous system is completely, like, done for, right? But if you take someone else who can barely do a push-up, you say, okay, I need you to max out. Let's go. And they do a push-up, and they maybe even try a second one and they fail, right? Like, one or maybe even 2 reps, and they completely fail, right? After the set, are they going to be as sore and as drained as the person who maxed out on 50 push-ups? No, like, this guy, he might, like, run out of breath for a little bit, and maybe he might feel a little bit, but definitely not as much as someone who maxed out like 50 push-ups, right? And that example, that shows basically, if you focus on higher intensity, you don't get as drained throughout the day. Yes, obviously you get a little bit tired, but definitely not as much as higher volume. And also, when you focus on higher intensity over volume, your workouts take a lot less time, right? You don't have to do 3 to 4 sets of, every exercise and stuff like that. Rather, you just do like 2 sets, for per exercise, right? Your workouts are a lot shorter, and that way you get to focus more time on other stuff in your day, obviously, like worship, like reading Quran, like, listening to lectures, going to the mirror, whatever it is, right, that you have to do, right? You get to focus more on that type of stuff rather than obviously taking longer to do the workout. And also, quick, like, third bonus one is that, when you do higher intensity, you have to rest more between the sets, right? You have to be resting at least like 3 to 5 minutes between, if you're actually, pushing. And it doesn't have to be to failure, but, if it's like 1 rep of shy of failure, for example, right? If you're doing that level of intensity, then you're going to need to be resting properly between the sets, like 3 to 5 minutes at least. And when you do that, you actually have time in your sets, between your sets, to actually, for example, read Quran, or listen to Quran, or listen to a lecture, or, you get to do something between the rest. So even in the rest, you get to do like ibadats. And even personally, for me, I used to memorize, Quran between the sets, and I memorized a lot of Quran just in the time between the 2 sets, right? So when you focus on higher intensity, you get to do that. But with volume, you don't rest as much between, higher volumes, so you don't have you can't really do that as much. Okay, secondly, you want to focus on compounds over isolations. Compounds meaning an exercise that involves multiple muscle groups, like, for example, in the handstand push-up, it's obviously mainly in my shoulders, but it's also triceps, it's also even the upper chest to an extent, like it's your whole like pushing complex almost, right? Weighted pull-up, like right here, what I was doing, right? Obviously in the back, mainly, right? In your lats, in your biceps, even your forearms, like grip and stuff, right? Focus on compounds, and isolations is obviously taking one exercise, focusing on like just your biceps, for example, with a bicep curl or tricep extension, right? Anything you're isolating an exercise, that's an isolation. And you want to focus on compounds over isolations. Why? Many reasons. Number one, you get a lot more bang for your buck with compounds over isolations, right? Compounds are basically 80% of the gains, while isolations are 20%, right? And especially like in pairing with higher intensity, it makes a lot more sense, right? Compounds, you do a lot less amount of exercises to get all of your muscles, but with isolations, you have to do a lot more. You have to get exercise for this and for this and then for this, right? You have a lot more exercises to do, and you need to do a lot more volume. That's why you see most programs online, they have higher volume, a lot of exercises, a lot of isolations, maybe a couple of compounds, but a lot of isolations, right? 6, even 8 exercises, even more than that, right? You have a lot of exercises, 3 to 4, even like 5 sets each, a lot less rest time. But for us, since we're focusing on high intensity, right, and we're focusing on compounds pair very well with high intensity, because you don't want to go high intensity on an isolation like a bicep exercise, right? Because you don't want to injure your bicep, right? But when you go compounds and high intensity, you get a lot more bang for your buck. And also, by the way, we said that we're training for Deen, we're training to be like the role model, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you study the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you learn that he wasn't built like some big bulky bodybuilder, right? He wasn't skinny, but he wasn't a big bulky body, but rather he was in the middle. He had a well proportioned physique. So he was built like like an athlete, like a warrior. So he was very well proportioned. And when you focus on the compounds over the isolations, then you naturally build that level of proportion. You don't mess with the proportions, right? But rather with isolations, you're isolating your bicep, so you're only growing your bicep and you're neglecting the other part. So you're kind of like messing with the proportions a little bit, right? So when you're focused on compounds, you naturally keep that proportion, but rather with isolations, you're not keeping it as much as with the compounds. And also with the compounds, you want to focus on only a couple of compounds. You don't need to do like, 5 different, compound exercises per workout. You want to just, like even like 2 to 4, even like one, right? Like 2 to 4 like compounds, like the main ones that you need. One main compound for your pushing, right? One main compound for, pulling muscles, one main for the legs, maybe like a core exercise, right? You want to focus on minimal amount of compounds that you need, especially in Ramadan. We're focusing on worship in this video, right? We're focusing on worship, we're focusing on Ramadan. Pick the minimum amount of exercises you need to, target all of the muscles and stuff, while obviously getting the gains. And thirdly, you want to focus on having less actual workout days, right? 3 to 4 days of workouts a week rather than 6 to 7 days, right? Why? Because when we focus on higher intensity, and when we focus on compounds, there's a lot of, stimulus that you basically need to rest more between the days, right? And you also start to see more consistent progress, right? All 3 of these kind of go hand in hand like a triangle, right? When you have high intensity, then you should go, compounds, and you should go 3 days a week. Because when you kind of alter like this kind of triangle, right? Well, let's say you did 6 to 7 days, you're not going to recover enough between the workouts, and you're going to start to see yourself plateau. Your numbers are going to plateau, right? If you focus on, volume and then compounds and then 3 to 4 days a week, then you're not going to be going as intense. You're not going to build that stimulus for you to even progress in your workout. So all of these 3, right, going 3 to 4 days a week, you train less. You get to actually focus on your ibadat in Ramadan, right? You get to read Quran, Taraweeh, all that type of stuff. You got to focus on Ramadan, get more gains, more result, more bang for your buck, while training less. It's like a win-win-win situation, right? So focus on 3 to 4 days a week. You don't need to train 6 to 7 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, even 3 days a week, I would say even. Okay, so we went over the 3 main things to focus on. Obviously, focusing on higher intensity and compounds and, less workout days, 3 to 4 days a week. But what time of the day should we actually work out? So basically, here are all the options, and we'll go over the pros and cons of each option, okay, inshallah. So we'll firstly, obviously, going to do before Fajr, right? This is in chronological order. Before Fajr, right? Pre-Suhoor, right? Basically in the middle of the night. After Fajr, either right after Fajr, like an hour or 2 after, 3 hours after Fajr, or closer to Dhuhr time, like later Duha time, like 10 a.m., 11 p.m., 11 a.m., right? Any later time. This is basically after Fajr. After afternoon, obviously, between Dhuhr and Asr, evening, Asr and Maghrib, or night, which is either right after Iftar, right after Isha, even right after Taraweeh, right? So what are the pros and cons of these options? So I would recommend any of the 3 green ones, right? And I would not recommend the red ones. Why? Before Fajr, if you're trying to train before Fajr, then honestly, like, that is the time where, like, the last third of the night where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the dua. So if you're not praying in that time, then I really don't know what to tell you. That's like the time for you to be praying and making dua, right? So you should be like really praying at that time. So I wouldn't do it before Fajr. And after, at night, after Iftar or after Isha, right? After Iftar, most people, like, you're trying to eat and spend time with the family or praying Maghrib. It's a very short time, right? That time should kind of be with the family. After Isha, right? If you want to, work out right after Isha, you should probably just pray Taraweeh. Taraweeh is more important than you training, right? You should pray Taraweeh, right? It's more important. And if you want to train after Taraweeh, then honestly, that's not really a good idea, because number one, if you're training after Taraweeh, that means you're probably cooking your sleep in one way or the other, right? You're going to either be sleeping late. You're basically going to try to sleep from Fajr to Dhuhr, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he made, dua that there's a lot of barakah in the early mornings after Fajr, right? So we should stay up after Fajr and, do ibadat or do work or anything that you need to do in that time, right? So basically, when you work out after Taraweeh, like, you're staying up late, you might even try to stay up till Fajr. And by the way, even your gains are made in your sleep, like while you're resting. There's not like while you're in the gym, right? So when you're compromising your sleep for your training, your gains are actually being compromised in the sense also, right? So I would not recommend before Fajr or at night for, obviously to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also even for your gain, like your sleep is being compromised. So you should really focus on these 3. And so how do you pick which one of these 3? What are the pros and cons of these 3 times? Okay, let's start with after Fajr, right? So basically, to pick one of these 3, firstly, it kind of just depends on personal preference and like your schedule, right? So if you can only really do this one, then obviously do in the evening between Asr and Maghrib. Right? If you can only do after Fajr, then do after Fajr, right? So obviously pick which, like base it on what you can actually be consistent with. But if you do have options, these are the pros and cons. So after Fajr is a really good time because you just ate like an hour before, like 2 hours, 3 hours before, right? You don't really feel that fasted, right? You're not too deep into the fast that you feel kind of tired or exhausted, right? So this is a pretty decent time. Evening is also, it depends on kind of your prototype, like what type of person you are. Evening is pretty good because right after the workout, even though you might be more tired than after Fajr, you do get to eat right after the workout and drink water right after the after the workout. So that's kind of your pros and cons, right? So and then afternoon is kind of just in the middle of that. Like you have some of that and some of after Fajr and some of after, Asr, like right before iftar. And so basically, you have to like know yourself. If you have options and you know that you're the type of guy that I can't work when I'm tired, like fasting like drains me, I'm cranky, XYZ, then try to go earlier, like after Fajr or afternoon if you have options. And then, but if you really don't feel a difference, like, oh, I don't really feel a difference. Like for me, for example, me, I don't feel too much of a difference when fasting, right? I still have like energy to work out and stuff. So then for me, I can do, after evening. So you have to know what type of person you are. Obviously, depending on your schedule, depending on what you can stay consistent with and be with, in those 3 to 4 days a week that you're working, choose whichever one of these is best for you and your personal energy levels. Okay, so let's go over some of the frequently asked questions about training in Ramadan. So how should you eat in Ramadan? Like if you're trying to gain weight, if you're trying to bulk, if you're trying to cut, if you're trying to recomp, right? First of all, if you're trying to gain weight or you're trying to bulk in Ramadan, like just don't, I'm sorry, just don't try to bulk in Ramadan. You're going to completely ruin your Ramadan. Just take the L if you're trying to gain weight. But most people who are trying to lose weight or or maybe skinny fat, like that's going to be the majority of people watching this video. Obviously, that's going to be a lot easier, a lot better for you to do, especially in Ramadan when you're fasting, right? So this is going to be very good for people who want to cut and recomp. And if you're, trying to, gain weight, obviously don't eat like very super little, right? But eat a decent amount, obviously, to not like, drop like all of your weight on your body, right? But don't try to stuff yourself, right? Be in the middle. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of food, 1/3 of water, 1/3 of air, right? So, be in the middle with your eating. And also make sure, this is super important, right? Super important. Make sure that you're eating good, healthy foods. Foods that are healthy, foods that are halal and tayyib, foods that are, obviously halal and that are good and pure for you, right? What is super important, especially when fasting, is the food that you break your fast with, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he would break his fast with, dates, surrounding dates and water, right? Dates are really good because they're natural sugars. It's really good for, breaking your fast, right? Break your fast and eat good foods after your fast, right? If you eat garbage food, you're gonna feel like garbage right after. You're gonna feel super lethargic during Tarawih, right? Eat good foods during Ramadan is super important. Number 2, can I even progress in training during Ramadan? Yes, you can progress in training. Actually, it depends on what you're talking about, because if you're talking about, gaining size and muscle, like I said, don't try to bulk on Ramadan. It's a super bad idea. You want to focus on your ibadah, not in terms of gaining weight. But in other stuff, like for example, obviously losing weight, definitely. Even in strength, you can definitely progress in Ramadan. A lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to be super weak in Ramadan. No, you're not actually. You can actually gain a lot of strength. Like even me personally, I have increased in my weighted pull-up sets weight, consistently over time during Ramadan, right? Training like this, when you focus on, intensity and focus on compounds and focus on, less days a week, recovering more. Right? You can definitely progress in Ramadan. Obviously, it shouldn't be your main goal to like PR, but you can definitely increase in Ramadan. Don't be like super scared of being weak in Ramadan. Should I just keep my training the same as before Ramadan? This is a good question. No, you shouldn't. You should still alter your training in Ramadan. Why? Because in Ramadan, you are fasting, right? You are in a different state. You're fasting for the whole entire month, right? You're not going to have as much energy as before Ramadan. And don't be scared like, oh, I'm not going to have any energy. You're still going to have a lot more energy than you think. But still, it's going to be less than before. And you want to make sure that your workouts are, focusing on those 3 things, the higher intensity, focusing on compounds 3 to 4 days a week, focusing on, proper rest between workout days. So you want to make sure it's aligned with that. And what if you're saying like, okay, Muzammil, I'm already like training, 3 to 4 days a week. I'm already doing higher intensity. I'm already doing compounds mainly. I'm already kind of doing this stuff. Even still, you should still switch your training a little, not switch, but tweak your training a little bit, that it's less in volume, make it the minimum amount of volume that you need, and also even in your intensity a little bit, right? If you're training 4 days a week and you're doing 5 compounds, for example, then do 3 days a week, go down to 3 days a week, and only do the three like minimum compounds, for example, right? Only focus on the very minimum amount of compounds you need to do. And also, maybe if you're pushing to failure on all of your sets, go to like one set below failure, right? Still tweak your volume, lower your volume, and also even your intensity a little bit if you're already doing that before Ramadan. Should I just pause my training during Ramadan? No. Like I said, if you're really training for Deen, then you should let your training feed into your Ramadan, right? If your training is for Deen and to train to be like the Prophet ﷺ, then that is a good deed that's going to be multiplied in Ramadan, right? But you don't want it to get in the way of Ramadan, right? So no, don't pause your training. Just make sure it's feeding to Ramadan rather than being compromised with everything that I said in this video. Won't I be tired after working out? No, or actually you might be a little bit tired, but you're not going to be as tired as you think, right? Especially if you focus on, higher intensity and compounds over, higher volume, right? Like I said, someone who maxes out on their push-ups, 50 reps, for example, they're going to be super exhausted, super drained, and their central nervous system is going to be done. They're going to be super sore, right? But if you take another person who does one push-up and that's like the max that they can do, they're not going to be super drained and sore, right? Why? Because when you focus on higher intensity, not like PR intensity, but higher intensity, maybe 80%, then you don't get as fatigued as the former. Am I not going to lose muscle? You might lose weight, right? You might lose weight in Ramadan. Obviously, it depends on your metabolism. If you're higher metabolism, like me, for example, or if you're lower metabolism, some people gain weight in Ramadan. I don't know how you gain weight in Ramadan, subhanAllah, but obviously it depends on your metabolism. But most people, you're obviously going to lose weight in Ramadan. And even if you lose weight in Ramadan, most of it, especially if you're training properly, like I mentioned in this video, is going to be, you're going to be basically recomping. Your fat is going to kind of turn more into muscle, especially, by the way, if you're a beginner. If you're a beginner, by the way, I would not worry about this question right here or this question right here about can I even progress? Because you can literally eat a stick and do 3 push-ups and you'll get progress, right? Don't focus on any of that if you're a beginner, under 2 years of training. But even if you do lose weight, you're going to be a lot more ripped and a lot more shredded, right? And you're going to basically look a lot better than before Ramadan. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Should I do cardio during Ramadan? This is a really good question. So I'm going to split cardio into 3 types of categories, right, for cardio. Number 1, light intensity, basically walking, light bike riding, light swimming, just kind of stuff like that. Super easy, super light. Number 2, I'm going to do medium/endurance, so long distance running. And then number 3 is maximum intensity, sprints, for example. Right, so let's start with number 1. Walking, light swimming, light bike. I would say for those ones, I would say definitely do them because obviously, really good for your heart and stuff like that. We're training for a holistic build. And you definitely want to do this. It's not going to tire you out. You should basically just do it. Especially walking, I would say, because walking, when you're walking, you can listen to Quran on that time, right? You can also worship, focus on worship. You're doing both the training and the worship, and the training is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it's like a triple win, right? You can listen to Quran, you can read Quran, you can listen to a lecture, you can even ponder about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Go outside without a phone and just think about, Allah says, وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, right? He praises those who ponder about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? وَرَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا, right? They remember that, Allah, you did not create this for no reason, right? They remember their purpose in life, right? So it's like a win-win-win-win situation. Obviously, definitely walking is really good in Ramadan. As for medium intensity, endurance, say for most people, probably not. Why? Like I said, when you max out on the push-ups, you get super fatigued and your central nervous system is kind of cooked. So most people who have not been running before, I would say definitely don't do long distance kind of running stuff. Only if you've been running before and you know how to pace yourself properly and stuff like that, and do an easy run where you kind of feel better after the run. But for most of us, we're not at that level, so I would say most people don't do that. And lastly, for sprints, this really, really depends on if you can handle it or not and what type of person you are. So if you can handle doing sprints, I would say definitely do them. But if you're not able to do it, and because sprints are intense, then I would say don't do them. But if you can handle doing sprints and doing only like once a week, for example, not like obviously every day, like once a week sprints, if you already have, for example, been doing sprints, 5 sets, 8 to 12 seconds, 1 to 2 minute rest between like that, then I would say even if you can handle sprints, do them once a week, or if you're doing two times a week, obviously go down to one a week, and I would say even lower the volume slash intensity. So if you're doing 5 sets, go to 4. If you're doing 8 to 12 seconds of sprinting, do like 6 to 8, right? Go lower. If you're doing like 1 to 1 minute 30 of rest between the sets, go up to 2 minutes rest, 2:30 rest, even make 3 minutes rest, right? Basically tone it down a little bit, especially in Ramadan, even if you're doing it once a week. So I would say those are the 3 types of cardios. Definitely like do low intensity, medium slash endurance. I would say probably for most people not. And for sprints, I would say do them once a week if you can handle them. If not, it's fine. And lastly, what should my training goals be during Ramadan? Good question. So here, definitely it shouldn't be to bulk and to gain weight. Obviously, shouldn't be to gain weight. You're not going to gain weight in Ramadan. Losing weight is obviously really good because obviously you're fasting. It's a good goal. Strength, you can go up in strength. I wouldn't really focus on it too much, but it can definitely happen. Especially, by the way, if you're new to training or not advanced in training, you're gonna progress like if you just do anything. I would say those are pretty fine. And also, I would say the most underrated goal that you can be training for in Ramadan, that you can progress a lot in, is mobility. See, mobility is very important, especially if we're training for a holistic build like the Prophet ﷺ. Having mobility is super super important, right? So definitely find out. Okay, for example, if you know that you have very tight hamstrings and you can barely do ruku' with a straight back and your legs fully straight, then do like some hamstring stretch. Do like a Jefferson curl stretch or Jefferson curls, right? Like every night or anything like that. If you have like pain in your shoulder, just do something for that. You can get a lot of gains in terms of mobility, especially during Ramadan, because it's not obviously tiring and anything like that. That's the most underrated goal, especially during Ramadan. Okay, so those were all of the frequently asked questions, and if you have any questions that I didn't go over in this video, then inshallah, you can put them in the comments. And by the way, I'm offering a trial to my prophetic build coaching, basically training for a holistic build and holistic physique like the Prophet ﷺ, throughout Ramadan for 3 to 5 serious brothers who are struggling with consistency and lack clarity in their training in terms of their goals and in terms of their programming. So if that sounds like you're serious and you're interested, then inshallah, you can fill out the form in the description. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.